All right, welcome back to the third video of this lecture series about setting up your first Ogre application. So in the first two sections, we installed Ogre, we set up our project properties. It basically created an empty console application and set up our Boost and Ogre SDK include files, libraries, and other components, such as your working directory and so on and so forth. And we have a main ogre.cpp file where we will start adding our program in. So the first thing that we will basically have to do is just like any other C++ application, is to include the functionalities we need to use, and that's our header files for our Ogre applications. So I'm going to add include Ogre \example application. Now this is the example application is where the example application class is hosted. And so we are going to use our first application, first program, or rather first project will be based off of the base application, or rather the example application class. So we will need to include that folder. Okay, fantastic. Then I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to call it my application. So it's going to be, and I'm going to make this based off of, or rather have it inherit from example application. And so this example application has a lot of functionalities in it. I'm going to show it up in a couple of seconds for you to see what is in it. And then obviously we'll have a public section. And what I'm going to have to do is to override the create scene of my base application. And I'm just going to leave it as an empty function for now. And one final thing that I need to do to get this up and running is to add my main function. And obviously, you will have a return 0 at the end of it because it's a integer function. And so what I'm going to do next is going to create an instance of my example app that I created, or my application class that I created. So it will be my application, and let's call it my game. And to start the game loop, I'm going to call the go method of my game. So this is it. It's going to be an empty scene. So when we start it up, it's not going to show anything whatsoever, specifically because we have created and overridden the create scene of the base application, or rather the example application, and we left it as blank. So let's compile this. We're going to go to build and then build solution, or press F7. And so after building, now I've got an error, and this is actually a compile error. So the error is effectively happening because it cannot open the include file boost /range.hpp. This is actually a good thing for us to happen here, because now we can go back to our project property and see what we did wrong. Actually, I think if you watch the previous window, I already had a call out on that previous window. I mistyped the environment variable when I was adding the boost functionality, or boost header files. So this is exactly the problem that's happening if the header or include folders, include library folders for your files are not added, so you would get errors of this kind. So to fix that problem, I'm going to go to properties of my project, go to the additional libraries, and lo and behold, here is the mistype. So it should be $ parentheses, your name of your environment variable /boost. I had accidentally left the open parentheses out. So now if I compile this, my project should compile. Don't worry about these warnings, these are just some conversion warnings. So I have another problem, and now the problem is a link problem. And I have 8 unresolved externals, which means that there are probably some of the link files that I added were not added properly. Let's fix those problems too. All right, so obviously, if you look at the errors, they would exactly point you out to what is missing and what is wrong. So remember, we added the include for Ogre overlay, but I forgot to add the libraries for the Ogre overlay. So if you go and look into your debug folder, or rather the lib debug folder, remember we added Ogre main and OIS. I totally forgot to tell you that we need to also add Ogre overlay _d, because obviously the base application, or rather the example application, uses it. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go to our project, open its properties, and this time we're going to go to the linker section, and then we're going to go to the input of the linker section. And so we will see Ogre main _d lib and Ogre OIS _d lib, but I've forgotten to add the Ogre overlay _d lib. So let's do that. I can either directly type it in there, but let's actually go to the edit section, and then Ogre overlay _d dot lib, and then OK. And now if I compile this application, it should run, and it should compile, and it should also link, which basically it's done. So it says build once successful. Now, if you run this project, you will see that your Ogre runs, and the Ogre rendering engine setup will show up. I'm going to use for the rest of this class Ogre 3D 9, or rather DirectX 3D 9 rendering subsystem. This rendering subsystem is already DirectX 9, at least is installed on my machine, so I don't the SDK for it, so I would not have any problem. But if you wanted to do DirectX 11 or OpenGL, you would have to have those SDKs also installed. So we're going to go with the DirectX 3D rendering. Also, I would not like to go in full screen. So basically, you see all your rendering system options are going to be in the window at the bottom once you select it. So for each of these, you would have properties that you can select. So for example, do you want to have DirectX 9E, or do you want to have anti-aliasing, fixed pipeline to be enabled, floating point, and all sorts of things. The thing that I want to change is basically my full screen. I don't want to go full screen, so you go to the full screen from the system options and then change from yes to no. By default, it is yes. When you make those changes, you see in the system setup, you will see that DirectX 3D 9 rendering option full screen no. And you can just go around and play with the rest of these modes as well if you wanted to, but that's the only thing that I wanted to change. And then if you click OK, then your rendering system will be set up. Your Ogre will basically finalize all the initializations that it needs to be done, it needs to happen, and then you would get an empty window, which is perfect because at this point our application is already completely set up now and it is working. And the reason that nothing is showing up is because, remember, with the create scene we had nothing in it, so it is basically an empty scene. Okay, so with this, we are going to go and now add a couple of things to our project to make it at least look a little nice. So what I'm going to do is we are going to bring in a mesh, and we're going to put this mesh inside the scene, kind of like in the middle, and then bring in a light, and then have the light to kind of be around the mesh so that we could see things in this scene. So you press escape, and then you exit out of your application. All right. I'm not going to go, at least in this video, in this lecture, into any of the details about your scene mesh and how you can actually go ahead and set up your graph for your entire scene. But at this point, what we are interested in is to bring in an object in the scene so that it would be placed in a three-dimensional world in front of us. So basically what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create an entity, and then that entity would have it would basically be a mesh, and that mesh will be let's make it a ninja mesh, and then we will add that mesh, or rather attach that mesh to the root of our scene node. And so basically it will be placed, whenever you have an Ogre app, then your scene will have a root, and then you can actually relate, and you can think of it as the origin of your environment, or rather the world, and then whatever entities you have in your scene, lights, for example, meshes, objects, planes, all sorts of things that you have, particle systems, you can actually add them and attach them as children of this node. And obviously you can add nodes to each other and create a kind of parent-child relationship between a bunch of different things to set up the mechanism for 3D rendering the movement and interactivity that you need off of your scene. So to do that, we're going to go into our already empty create scene, and then we are going to go ahead and create an entity. So first thing first, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, before my class, I'm going to actually add Ogre as a namespace. So using namespace Ogre. When doing so, I can actually resolve the functionalities from my Ogre namespace, and so I would not have to use namespace resolution with it. So in the create scene, I would like to access the entity. So if you don't use the namespace, actually let's do it. Let's first not use the namespace Ogre. So we'll have to do Ogre names entity. So I'm going to create an Ogre entity pointer, and let's call it my mesh. And we will make this from M scene manager create entity. This function will create the entity for us. And so there are different ways that you can create this the entity. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to give this entity a name. Let's call it my underscore ninja. And then I'm going to use the mesh for the ninja. So just to have a quick kind of sneak peek at what is actually in my Ogre system, let's go ahead and open up our Ogre. And so in the Ogre SDK, you would notice that there's a media folder. If you click on it, you will have shading media, materials, models, all sorts of things. When you go to models, you would see a bunch of 3D models that are basically .mesh objects. So I'm going to actually use ninja.mesh, which is this guy. So we'll use that as ninja.mesh. And this ninja may be a little bit too big for our scene, but that should not be a problem. We can scale it down a bit later. So now I have my entity created. Let's actually type in a comment. So ninja entity created. Now, by simply creating an entity, it's not going to be placed in the scene. So I would have to actually attach this entity as an object in my scene. So to do that, the simplest way is basically I'm going to go and get my scene manager. And then from the scene manager, I'm going to get the root, get scene root node. And actually, the documentation on Ogre is actually pretty nice. So once you type in, then the auto IntelliSense will auto-populate the options that you have. And so, for example, here you see that the Ogre get root scene mode basically gets the entire scene, and then it also restores the hierarchy of your scene. So I'm going to get the scene, the root scene node, and then attach to it attach object my mesh. All right, so now let's compile our code. Okay, after a while it compiled, and it compiled successfully. So now this object is actually added to the scene. So I'm going to run my project again, and then, okay. Now, it's blank, so we don't see anything. It's because I don't have any light in my scene. So I got to go and add a light to my scene as well. We can, thankfully, just use the same properties and process here that we did for our mesh entity. We create another entity, we make it a light, and then we attach a light to it and set the light properties. Okay, so let's, for the sake of some documentation, go ahead and just add documentation there, and then a light entity. So for the light entity, I'm going to go and create an ogre light pointer. Let's call it my light, or main light. And this would be, again, an M scene manager. Create light. And I would have to create an ID for it, so let's call it main light. One of the things that's kind of important is to keep the ID is unique and nicely descriptive, so that we won't have any problem with them if we have a complex scene. The next thing is to set our light type. So main light set type, and this will be an ogre light alt underscore point. And obviously I misspelled ogre. Your ogre light alt point. This will make it a point light. In fact, let's see, ogre light, and these are the effectively the enum for the light type. So you have LT directional, LT point, and LT spotlight, right? So I'm going to delete that. So here, create a light, set light type to point light, and once our main light is set to point light, we will need to set its position and its color. So then again, we will use the main light object and set position. And for the position, let's place it at 0, I'll say 30, 0. So that would be kind of centered in the screen, and 30 units along the up direction, because the Y direction is the up direction. So place light 30 units above ground, and then main light set color. It's actually British English, so color is COLOUR, and then the color that gets 3 floats, 1.0, 1.0 F, comma 1.0 F. And this will create a white light for us. Oh, set diffuse color. Okay, set diffuse color. All right, so now that our main light is created, we're gonna attach it to the root of our scene, or the root node of our scene. So we do m scene manager get root scene node, and then attach object main light. So this will basically attach the light to the root of the scene. Now, obviously, this is not really the right way. I mean, this is just a very simple, just prototype that I'm just building. But you wouldn't really want to attach objects directly to your root node, except for example, for floor plane or something that everything could actually get reference to. So next unit will get into the basics of your scene manager and scene nodes and objects and things like that, and you will see that for each entity we create, we're going to actually create a node, and then we can actually make these nodes in a parent-child hierarchy. So for example, if you wanted to set up a third-person character, then there would be a node that would be the root of that character. Then you would add the mesh, the skeletal mesh, or the static mesh in a node, and then you attach that node as a child to the root. And then if you wanted to parent a camera on top of the mesh, then you create another node and parent it to the characters node, which is also parented to the root. So if you make rotations, translations, scaling on one node, the propagation of those transformations could also flow properly. We will actually have a unit covering all those concepts for you, so that's coming up later. But at this point, this is what we wanted to accomplish: create a scene that we can see. So let's compile and run this project, and let's see what happens. All right. So now you see the scene is not blank anymore, and you can move your mouse and kind of see different views, and then with WASD you can actually move about. But the problem is that the placement of the light, which was 0, 30, 0, is not quite right, because it's kind of sort of in the middle of the Ninja mesh, so you won't see anything. So let's exit out of this, and let's go and place this actually about 100 units, or rather 200 units above, and pop out about 200 units out on the z-axis too. And I believe that in Ogre the z-axis points out of the camera, but or the screen, but we'll see. So let's run this project one more time. Okay. So, so now that it is run, now you see that so we placed the light out. So so the light is about 300 units up, about 200 units behind our object, and so so this is actually a nice view of our scene and the object. So that is your first sort of application project that you created. Okay, let's exit out of this. And then again, I'm gonna go over and real quickly show you how the system is set up. We set up our project. We added the include files or folders, and the library folders and the binary folders to our project. And then we also added the Ogre main OIS and Ogre overlay.lib static libraries for linking. Then we added the example application and included that, and created an application that was the child, or basically created the application based off of the example application. That's our class, and it has a create scene, which is basically the scene of our environment. And then in the scene, we created an entity and made it a ninja mesh, and then attached it to our scene node root. Then created a light, set up its light type, for example, light point, or if you wanted to make it an LT directional, it would be a directional light. Set its position and sets its diffuse color, and then attached that light as well to the root scene node, and this effectively created our project, our entire scene. Then in the main function, we basically instantiated our application. So my application created an object of it called my game, and then we set my game.go, which basically runs the game loop. So I'm just going to make this a directional light, so you'll see the difference between the directional lights and the regular lights. So as you see, the directional lights basically don't have any location, and they're all set, and they have a direction basically. So it's kind of placed up front, in front of the character, and it's pointing out at a direction that's about 300 units up and about 200 units on the z-axis. And so, and the axis basically, the x-axis is the horizontal axis pointing rightwards, the y-axis is the vertical axis pointing upwards, and then the z-axis is the axis that's made up of these two axes. So it's pointing outwards from the scene, effectively for the camera. So let's move back this to the point light, right? So this is your application, and this is how it is set up to work. Now for this, I'm going to give you a project to create. So kind of like a classwork that you will have to do and submit your project that you created, kind of similar to what you have here, and have a go at it and play a little bit with your scene, with your lights, and set multiple lights up, set multiple meshes out in your scene, and scale them up and play with them and see how you can work. And get a little bit comfortable with Ogre, and then in the next round of the units, we will start working with your scene graph and how the scene nodes and the three-dimensional manipulations of the objects in your scene will be done in Ogre. So with this, I'll wrap up. This is actually a kind of a short and nice video, and it just showed you how to set up the application basically and have a go at it. And I will talk to you in the next wiki unit, and we'll start building more complex scenes and applications with Ogre.